Hi, this is Miss McCauley, and I am here to help you learn how to divide fractions by whole numbers. Most of this video has been created by one of our former Viking teachers, Mrs. Bino, who now teaches in Texas. Also, it's important to know that there will be 3 parts to this video, so please make sure you watch all 3 parts and then do the note check.
Numbers by fractions. Make sure you have these notes downloaded into GoodNotes so that you can follow along. Also make sure you have your Virtual Manipulatives app ready to go, which we'll be using a lot during this lesson. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we all know that math can be like its own language. So the first thing we need to do is learn a new vocabulary word, or in other words, speak math. That vocabulary word is called reciprocal. Make sure you get it spelled correctly. Reciprocal. A reciprocal is any 2 numbers with a product of 1. And I'll show you an example in a minute here. So any 2 numbers with a product of 1. And remember, product means multiplication. Okay? To help me remember reciprocal, I like to think of the word refliprical. Make sure you write that down. Reciprocal, refliprical. It's kind of fun to say. And the reason why I call reciprocal a refliprical is because what you're doing is flipping what is on the top and the bottom. So for example, if I gave you the fraction 4/5 and asked you to find the reciprocal or refliprical, you would flip what's on the top and the bottom. So the 5 would be on the top and the 4 would be on the bottom. So we've simply traded what's on the top and what's on the bottom. And that's its reciprocal. Let's try a few more examples together. Let's say I gave you the fraction 2/3. The reciprocal or refliprical of 2/3 is 3/2. And just to double check, let's multiply them together. 2/3 times 3/2. Remember, you learned from multiplying. Multiply the numerators together, multiply the denominators together. 2 times 3 is 6. 3 times 2 is also 6. And 6 divided by 6 simplifies to 1. So we can see that these numbers really are reciprocals of each other because their product is 1. Let's try another one. Let's say you were given the whole number 6. Well, first write that whole number as 6/1. Then we're simply going to flip it. And that's right, we get 1/6. Let's double check with multiplication. Make my eraser smaller. 6/1 times 1/6. 6 times 1 is 6. 1 times 6 is also 6. 6 divided by 6 equals 1. Let's try one more. Let's say you were given the mixed number 2 1/2. First, change that mixed number to an improper fraction using MAD. Remember, multiply, add denominator. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 plus 1 is 5. And our denominator stays the same at 2. And then the reciprocal of 5/2 would be, that's right, 2/5. Let's double check with multiplication. 5/2 times 2/5. 5 times 2 is 10. 2 times 5 is 10. And 10 divided by 10 equals 1. So we can see that those numbers really are reciprocals of each other. Okay, now that we know what reciprocals are, let's practice a little bit more. Another name for reciprocal is multiplicative inverse. That's a tongue twister. Multiplicative inverse. What are some words in everyday language that are similar to reciprocal or inverse? Any ideas? Maybe you've heard the word invert before, and this doesn't have to be words from math. It could be from anywhere. Or maybe reciprocate. Okay? Those are words that, let me add the E and reciprocate. Words that are similar to multiplicative inverse and reciprocal. Pilots can fly in an inverted position or upside down. How can you use the everyday meaning of invert to help you remember the mathematical meaning of multiplicative inverse or reciprocal? Well, we could say that when a plane flies in an inverted position, the top and bottom of the plane exchange places. So, in a reciprocal, the numerator and the denominator of a number trade places. Let's write that down. In an inverted plane, the top and bottom of the plane trade places, just like the numerator and denominator. Okay, once you've got that copy down, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, so let's just practice finding some reciprocals to make sure we've really got this. And you can see I've got a picture of flip-flops here to try to help us remember that word refliprical reciprocal. So let's write refliprical one more time just to help us remember. Okay, let's say you were asked to find the reciprocal of 2/3. The reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. Let's check that with multiplication. 2/3 times 3/2 equals 6/6, and we know that 6 divided by 6 equals 1. So we know that 2/3 and 3/2 really are reciprocals. Okay, let's try another one. The reciprocal of 1/8 would be, that's right, 8/1, or that simplifies to 8. Okay? Another reciprocal of 5. Remember, write that 5 as 5/1, and the reciprocal of 5/1 is 1/5. Very good. Okay, now that we've done some work with reciprocals, it's time to get into dividing fractions. There are two different ways to divide whole numbers by fractions. We'll first learn how to divide fractions using a model, and then look at dividing fractions using an equation. Let's discuss the steps for each. Method 1, using a model, and this is where we're going to use our virtual manipulatives. When we use a model, the very first step is to model the first number in the division sentence. And remember, that first number is called the dividend. Okay? After we've modeled the first number in the division problem, we then divide the dividend into groups according to the divisor. Okay, and that's the steps for using a model to divide whole numbers by fractions. Now let's talk about the steps when you use an equation. When you use an equation, the very first step is to write all whole numbers over 1. The second step is to multiply the first number by the second number's reciprocal. So that's where that reciprocal is going to come into play. Okay, so yes, when we divide fractions, we're actually going to be changing them to multiplication problems to help us solve them. Okay, so let's go ahead and try an example together now. Our first example is 3 divided by 1/4. So we're first going to try this using a model. So go ahead now and pull up your virtual manipulatives. I'm going to pull up mine. Okay, and the first thing we're going to do is just go ahead and write our division problem, which remember was 3 divided by 1/4. Remember, step 1 when using a model is to model our first number, or in other words, our dividend, which is 3. So I'm going to select the fraction tab and pull out 3 of the 1s to model my 3. Okay, that's step 1. Now we need to put these into groups of 1/4. So I'm going to select my 1/4 and just line those up with all of my 1s. Okay, make sure you're lining them up correctly. You should have 4 1/4 pieces for each whole number 1. Remember, the fraction 1/4 means you need 4 of them, okay, to make a whole. Okay, so I've got all my 1/4 groups. Now we're putting them into groups of 1 because our numerator is 1. Okay, so I'm just going to be circling each 1/4 piece. And you can see here that we have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 pieces. So 3/4 divided by 1/4 is 12. Go ahead and take a screenshot of that. And then we're going to drop that into GoodNotes. Okay, make it a little bit bigger so we can see it. And that's how we divide with a model. Now let's divide 3 divided by 1/4 using an equation. So again, we're going to start with 3 divided by 1/4. Remember, our first step when we have an equation is to write our whole number over 1. So I'm going to rewrite this as 3 over 1 divided by 1/4. Okay? Next step is to multiply our first number times the reciprocal of the second number. So I'm going to change my division sign to multiplication, and my 1/4 becomes the reciprocal, 4 over 1. Now I simply multiply straight across as you already learned how to do with multiplying fractions. 3 times 4 is 12, and 1 times 1 is 1. So we get a quotient of 12 over 1, but we're going to go ahead and simplify that to 12, since we know that 12 divided by 1 equals 12. So you can see in both examples here that we have 12 as our final answer. So let's go ahead and write that up at the top here. 3 divided by 1/4 equals 12. And that's our first dividing fractions example.
Okay, this is the end of part 1. You should have completed the notes up until this point and done one modeling example. Really quickly, just to make sure that you've been listening, I would like to make sure that you answer this question. What app do you need to have to complete these notes? iTunes U, your Calculator HD, or Virtual Manipulatives? Please answer that on the Google Form note check that has been included with this video. Bye for now. Stay tuned for part 2.